So this is a continuation of the last video where we went over making decisions when it comes to choosing reference and editing it together and combining different references into one cohesive piece for a hit combo. So I kind of wanted to go through the next step of this, which was actually animating it and getting it into Engine, and sort of some of the decisions that I made as a departure from this reference in the animation that you'll see here. Again, I'm not sure 100% how the playback is on these when I screen share and record. So if it's really bad quality, right after I show it, maybe I'll sneak in like an actual play blast that's been uploaded correctly to this, so that you can see. But I'll also be scrubbing through it. So I wrote down some stuff here, and I just want to go over like 4 or 5 things that I'm keeping in mind when I'm starting to animate one of these pieces, specifically for games. Again, not just animating for demo reel sake, but for actual implementation in Engine. So first off, I have this reference piece. It's been retimed a bit, not a ton, but a bit. You notice that the first frame of this animation, ignore the fact that it's on frame 7 to start. That is unprofessional. But the reason it's on frame 7 is because I'm starting from frame 7 of this reference. We're going to go into a little bit more of that later, but the quick answer is that we need to already be in motion, and there needs to be a step taking place in frame 0 of the animation, frame 1. We need to be moving. So that is why we're starting at 7. I've also increased the speed of the animation, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. And I've also clipped it so that we don't have anything after this, because this was, if you remember in the last video, he actually continued on to do like 2 other moves, which were awesome, but we're not using. So I clipped this, and then whatever this is, 2/3 of the animation is getting back into idle, which he doesn't do here. And that is essentially something that you have to come up with on your own, whether that's shooting reference or just straightforward animating it. So that's the first thing. So reference retime. Oh, I was going to say this. I want to bring this over here. So if you're not familiar, if you select your image sequence, however you've created it, and you go to the attributes, if you look at the image number, you can actually, by default, this will, it'll just be correct. It'll be keyed 0 at frame 0, and the last frame will be keyed on the last frame of the reference. But you can break that connection, and then you can just make that tangent linear when you select the image sequence. It's the only thing that pops up in the graph editor. Make it linear, and then you can make your changes. If you're making multiple like keys on the, some parts you want slow, some parts you want fast, those you probably won't want to be linear. But again, you're not going to be one for oneing this reference, like frame by frame. So it may not matter if you have some linear stuff in there, because you can fill in the gaps otherwise. Let me get this out of the way. So that is the reference. Next, I had sort of a short list of technical metrics. Again, this is not for an actual game. This is not something that is like I'm working with the designer on, who might have a list of things that I need to accomplish. Here's the frame it needs to hit on. Here's, what we're trying to do in this. Here's, I don't have art direction telling me like, oh, this is how the character is doing things. I'm just sort of making it up as I go along, which for personal projects is fine, but just make it make sense. So that's the overall thing. So I have a list of things that I need to figure out before I even start animating, and that's, he needs to be moving forward. So I need to make a plan for having him already in motion and moving forward with a foot off the ground when I start this animation. So I define that frame in the reference. I want to decide when the contact is going to be for the hit. So in this one, this is, an early hit, 8 or 9 frames in, where he makes contact with the enemy. In the reference, I believe, even again, we're starting here. I mean, that's pretty, we'll say it's there. Was that 8 frames, 7 frames? That's pretty quick. So again, just something to keep in mind. There's not a lot of room for dramatic anticipation and strategic changes of shapes in 7 or 8 frames. The human eye doesn't read things that quickly. I forget what it is, but I think it's 8 frames the human eye takes to read something. So plan ahead for that. And the last thing that I have to plan out for is getting back into idle, because our reference doesn't do it. And this is where I'm practice, do what I say, not what I do. If you're trying to build up your reel and for the first time, and you're trying to do this the entire way correctly, film reference, get into this pose and get back into idle. First off, you're going to see what feels natural. Even though he just takes a lunge forward and the idle the idle poses, right foot back, left foot forward, it might feel more natural to you in this pose specifically to take a step forward into idle, which is generally what a designer, in the past, it's what's happened. It's like designers, oh no, move forward, because it feels weird to hit and then move, take a step backward. In this particular case, though, I did not shoot reference. I just made it up. I've done enough steps in animation that I felt I could successfully wing it, for lack of a better term. Also, this was an opportunity I realized to plus up the animation a little bit. If the player doesn't successfully continue the combo, you want it to feel satisfying on the way back, which is just one of the goals I have. The whole thing has to feel satisfying because this is the first hit. You're going to be spamming this a lot. If you don't successfully do the melee combos, it may be the only action you see. So it needs to still feel, even though it's like the base one, it still needs to feel like you're the hero of this game. You just did something cool. Like you are Raphael. You're not just some dude swinging a sword. So yeah, the goals I had needs to be punchy, immediate satisfaction for the player. That's going to be spammed a lot. So my next choice, so I'm just actually, let's just clip this. So if I scrub through, if you saw the last video, where this clip of reference, or what this clip of reference looks like. But I'll just scrub through it for the sake of showing you guys. And then I will center this one and I'll hit play, but I'll also scrub through it. So this is where we ended up with the animation. So I had a lot of fun with this one. I think it's successful in a lot of ways. I think there are some things that I'm not super happy with, but again, personal projects on your weekend or after work, you don't want to spend 20 hours doing this stuff. So yeah, I was trying to make decisions as to where I could plus it up, but before I could do that, my workflow for this stuff is to get it into Engine as quickly as possible. So I had my idle pose from an idle animation I'm also doing for this move set. So I had that idle pose at frame 0 or 7 for me, and an idle pose at frame 48, which is essentially what's like, okay, this feels, I'll pick a spot. I don't know that it was 48 at the beginning, but it was probably something like 50 because I just picked a round number. And then I was basically building out like a contact pose like this and saying, oh, let's get centered here. Yeah, there we go. Let's not do that again. There we go. Basically, like getting this pose built and then shifting it around in the timeline to see when I export this and I bring it into Engine, how does it feel? And it's not going to look great because you have 3 keys in there. You have 2 idles and a contact pose, but it will give you an idea of how it will feel. And that will unblock people. If you're in an actual, studio creating a game, it'll unblock people down the line. That design can start doing stuff, VFX can start iterating on ideas. It unblocks a whole lot of people. So yeah, now I can go into areas that I wanted to plus up. So this anticipation he does is really cool. It's like a sword spin. Unfortunately, there's a couple things that are different with my animation, and chief among them is that it's a sai, it's not a sword. So this really cool like rotation around isn't as dramatic with a little short blade. It's just sort of flipping your wrist over. So I was thinking to myself, how can I make that pop a little bit more? And you see a lot of Raphael spinning, or all the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles spin their weapons. So I thought that would be a cool thing to throw in there. Again, difficult though, because we're making contact by 9 frames in. So not a lot of time to spin and have that read. And I think it's debatable how successful it is. So that's an area. Just this overall anticipation, this is part of it, getting that side to be, held in this position. But then just the whole dramatic, or the dramaticness of the pose versus, it's probably its relevant frame in the reference is something like this. It's I'm sure it's cool in real life, but it's just not as cool as it could be. The turtles are tough, by the way. If you do, you have a massive shell on your back, it's really hard to get like reverse, C and then a reverse C, or like S shapes in your torso from the side. But again, your number one priority is this camera, because that's the camera that I've chosen for the game, which I try to like recreate in perspective view here. That's the one that matters the most. So, maybe it doesn't make sense for the side to be, that height or something like that, but it's readable from the camera and it feels good. So yeah, that was an area I wanted to plus up. Really, we don't have a lot of, it's very short. I think it really is about getting this, like, so for example, this extension in the lunge. He just kind of steps on the ground. He doesn't really, his feet slide on the ground, I should say. He doesn't really take a big step. So that's a difference. We also, because it's a Psy, it's this sort of pose, which is a little bit broken, but this feels a lot better than slicing with your open hand with the Psy. It's a stabbing weapon, I think. I don't think it's necessarily like a sword slicing weapon. So even this is a stretch, I think, but it's more successful than the palm up version, which treats it sort of like a mini sword. And then in the return to idle, I'm thinking, well, okay, it can't just stand up. If you give yourself enough time, so that's why I added in, if you give yourself enough time, you're going to want to see something in that. Again, if you hit this attack a lot, you want to feel like you did something cool. So if you don't finish the combo correctly, at least you get the payoff of this, something cool happening on the way back. And this is tough to do because he's just standing up. So in the way we did that is with this sort of spin of the Psy here. And this is one of those things that I'm sort of torn on because I think it's a cool idea, but this was not I didn't use any reference for it. That's my, mark of shame. Something like that specifically, which is like something very technical that you have to know how to do. You should probably find reference for that. And I think people aren't even spinning it by like letting go of the handle and then it spins on its own. They're like, hooking their thumb or their finger into one of those slots on the weapon, and it's spinning around there. It's not even technically correct. But that is something that if it was my real, like, actual job I'm getting paid for, that's something that I'm doing here. I have 4 hours on the weekend. I'm going to rotate this 360 degrees. So yeah, I felt that there were a few elements of this that made it difficult. The shell, the stubby legs for this character make it tough to get like big leaps. Legs lock out very, very quickly. But overall, I feel like it's pretty successful as an exercise in animation. It still felt snappy. I'm going to bring up Unreal Engine so we can see it in action. Go full screen. There we go. Come on. Nope. We'll do this, then F11. There we go. So we have, a little walk that I've done, run, and then we have our attack. So again, this is like where the default camera is. You can spin around the player, obviously, but it just feels good to hit this. Like I would feel satisfied if I did this to knock out like a bunch of low level enemies in the game, because that's just the way you do it until you get like cooler moves or whatever in your arsenal. And I do think like there are some elements of like the blend that are not as successful. Like the Psy spins get a little bit lost. There's some weirdness with that shoulder coming back up as well. There's like a big spring into the idle, which is something that I'll look into. But overall, I'd say it's a successful exercise in hit combo animation. So yeah, the next step after this is getting the next bit of reference, which I believe was that double kind of kick. And I would be starting somewhere from this pose-ish and going into the kick from there. Because again, you don't make that kick unless you are successfully like executing a hit combo. So you're never going to do that from idle. But it will have to end in idle in case you don't get the next one, the third one. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think that one other thing that I want to just kind of blanket statement here, like for example, I built this one. I did start with the idle pose, but after getting into engine, I realized that this frame was the one that was the most successful. By the way, the foot in the air, I don't know if I can't remember if I explained this or not, but having one foot on the ground and one foot already stepping helps people, designers, set up the automatic closing of distance or rotating towards enemies. Because it doesn't, both feet aren't sliding on the ground. It looks a little bit more like you're launching off with one foot. And it feels better in engine. So that's the reason I wanted to do that. But the reason I say that is because I still built this like starting with the idle pose, and I ended with the idle pose. And if you're just starting out or you're trying to build up your demo reel or something like that, it can be a little confusing. Like, okay, well, am I supposed to animate from this pose? Am I supposed to animate from the idle pose? Um, Animate from the idle pose. Make sure, because you want to make sure, even though you're handcrafting it, you want to make sure that your animation works from the idle. It doesn't feel like janky, unnatural. You don't want to get all the way into engine and do all this stuff before you find out, oh, it doesn't blend well. But once you know what frame like you want to hit, you don't, like if I go back to frame 0 on this, you're gonna see there's a lot of stuff that happens in here that doesn't make 100% of sense. We got some gimbaling, we got some weird pose changes. If you're doing a demo reel, you're going to want to have like handcrafted from idle back into idle, because that demonstrates like theoretically this is what it would look like in engine. If you want to submit like gameplay capture, if you can get a high quality gameplay capture to sell that, then that's great, because that'll show like the actual transition. But I would still include like a full play blast from beginning to end of that, to sort of show people like, yeah, I can get it working from this position to the next one. But that's sort of a different thing from how it feels in engine. That's going to be different. Yeah, anyway, I hope this was helpful, and we're going to get the next one going, and hopefully it looks just as successful as this one.